Hi, welcome back to Detective and Mystery Fiction. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. Carden, Crook Comedian by Johnston McCulley. Detective Story Magazine, January 20th, 1920. Chapter 1. An Irregular Hold-Up. To relate how Nifty Burke became the right-hand man of Joe Carden, the famous crook comedian, is to betray no confidence. Every man and woman of standing in the underworld knows the story now, and even Nifty Burke himself can tell it, and laugh as he does so, which he did not do at first. But time has taken the edge off what Nifty once thought a disgrace, and his association with Joe Carden has more than repaid him for losing his standing as a hold-up man of skill and courage. He was not Nifty Burke then. He was Shorty Burke, and there was nothing nifty about him. He lived like a rat in a hole, crept out now and then to gain sustenance through nefarious methods, always feared the touch of an official hand on his shoulder because he had neither money nor influence with which to fight through court, and was miserable generally. There came an evening, dark and misty, when Burke slipped from the room he called home, went straight down a flight of rickety stairs, journeyed through a foul alley that was in total darkness, and so came to a side street where there were few pedestrians save furtive men who dodged into the shadows when they met one another. Along this street he hurried, and so on into another, and reached a tiny park with curving walks that were bordered with trees and shrubbery. Crouching behind a clump of brush, Burke tied a black handkerchief around his neck in such a manner that he could draw it up quickly over his chin and make a mask, pulled his cap down low over his eyes, and took a revolver from beneath his left arm under his coat. Burke hated to admit it to himself, but that revolver always worried him. He needed it in his business, and yet his standing, or lack of it, in the community was such that he scarcely dared apply for a permit to carry a gun. And carrying a gun without a permit is a thing both sinister and dangerous. Burke never had fired the revolver, and was not sure whether it was accurate. He did not have the slightest intention in the world of firing it. The revolver was used only as a menace. Burke was a common hold-up man. Others in the game declared that Burke had courage and possessed a sort of sixth sense that caused him to pick the right victims. He had been incarcerated but once, and then only for 6 months on a charge of vagrancy. Burke admired the plaudits of others of his ilk, but his existence was not pleasing. He never seemed to get far ahead. His enterprises were dangerous and productive only enough to furnish a meager living. Burke was not satisfied. His journey to the little park tonight was in an effort to replenish his purse. On one side of the park was a cluster of short streets lined with studios, and Burke knew that certain gentlemen who lived there often walked across the park and along the dark paths after having dined at a big hotel on the avenue on the opposite side of the little square of green. It was almost midnight now. Burke shivered a bit because of the cold mist and crept closer to the clump of brush. A short distance away there was a sudden gleam beneath one of the lights. Burke knew the gleam. It came from the shield and buttons of a policeman. Burke almost held his breath. He dropped the handkerchief around his neck and put the revolver beneath the clump of brush. Then he waited, crouching close to the ground, scarcely daring to breathe. The patrolman swung past within 6 feet of Burke and went on across the square. Almost immediately another man came along the path, the sort of man Burke was expecting. But Burke did not dare step from his place of concealment and attempt a hold-up. The patrolman was too near. A single squeal of fright from the victim might be enough to bring the officer back on the run. And Burke was not ambitious to spend a term of years behind the walls of the big prison up the river, to wear a degrading uniform, and be known by a number, and to be known to the police always thereafter as a person to be suspected of all things at all times. 15 minutes longer Burke waited, crouching behind the clump of brush in the drizzle of rain. He felt sure now that the patrolman had gone down the street, that he merely had been cutting across the park to get to some report box at the appointed hour. Burke began to despair. It was getting rather late, and the mist and drizzle cut down the chances of a pedestrian coming along the path. And then, beneath the light in the distance, Burke saw his man. He watched carefully. The one who approached wore evening dress, had his hat on the back of his head, and was carrying an umbrella at a rakish angle. Burke liked that. It meant that the man was not alert, that he was thinking of pleasant things, and did not have his mind concentrated on the possibilities of danger. Catching a man off guard that way was half the battle. A man taken by surprise rarely thinks and acts quickly. The path forked, and Burke held himself ready to dodge to the other branch of it, if his prospective victim elected to take it. But his man came straight on. Now Burke prepared for business. He glanced down the walk in the other direction and made sure that nobody approached. He pulled the handkerchief up over his chin, settled his cap, picked up the revolver, and braced himself for a quick step to the edge of the walk. On came the victim. Burke judged the distance correctly, and at the proper time darted forward, the revolver held in a menacing manner before him. "Put 'em up," he snarled. The man before him stopped instantly and allowed the umbrella to tip backward. "Quick! Up with them hands or I'll plug you," Burke declared, a mean and threatening hiss in his voice. The man standing before him did raise his hands, but to close the umbrella carefully and deliberately, and then to toss it aside on the grass. "And suppose I don't put them up?" The other wanted to know, still chuckling. "If you don't, I'll plug you." "You haven't the nerve," the victim declared. "Pardon me while I laugh again. This is an excellent joke, and allow me to ask you one question. Just one. Did you ever hear of Joe Carden, the comedian? I believe he also is known by that name." "Well, my young friend, I am Joe Carden, and you are trying to hold me up. Fancy that. You wouldn't shoot in a million years. The comedian, are you?" "And I'm the king of Siam," Burke said. "I see that you do not believe me. Do you know anything about this Joe Carden?" "Only what I've heard," Burke admitted. "But I know that he's got a long blue scar across his left wrist." "Very good. Suppose you take a look at my left wrist then." The arm was extended quickly, and Burke, keeping a close watch on his man, pulled back the sleeve. The scar was there. "Course I didn't know," Burke began. It was his attempt at apology. It is not ethical for one crook to steal from another, save under most peculiar circumstances. At the moment of speaking, Burke experienced a sensation. Something happened to him that he often had declared could not happen. A man got away with his gun. Joe Carden made a lightning-like movement. Burke felt a quick pain in his wrist. The revolver was torn out of his grasp, and Joe Carden, the crook comedian, was chuckling once more. "You're not even a good hold-up man," Joe Carden sneered, stopping his laughter suddenly and getting a new note in his voice. "Now, what do you suppose I am going to do with you?" Burke had heard certain tales about Joe Carden, that everything was as a joke to him, that he was utterly without fear, and that he rewarded friends and punished enemies in a way that caused him to be spoken of frequently. There was considerable mystery about him, too. His crimes were all unusual, and he kept the police half insane trying to apprehend him when they had the goods on him. Fear came to Burke now, for he imagined Joe Carden was about to give him punishment. He began cringing. "Honest, I didn't know," Burke said. "I wouldn't have tried it on you, you know that." "Gee, I just supposed you were some swell going home from the hotel dining room. Possibly I'll overlook it this time," Carden said. "What's your name?" "Burke. I've heard of you, an artist in your particular line. Yet I got your gun away from you." I was a bit surprised. It's a bad thing to allow yourself to be surprised when you are engaged in such an enterprise. On second thought, I don't think I'll let you escape entirely. I never guessed, "Stop snivelling," Joe Carden commanded. "I think I can use a man like you, Burke. Possibly make something of you before I'm done. I've had a man for a couple of years, and only yesterday, catching him stealing from me, I suggested that he leave town and remain away. I am informed that he is on his way west, and I want a man to take his place." "What's the job?" Burke asked. "Obeying orders. I live like a gentleman, and a gentleman has a servant. You'll be valet. I wasn't cut out to be any he-made." If you are worrying about the job being too effeminate for your taste, you may cease worrying. It will have stern moments, even violent ones perhaps. You'd be my right-hand man, and there'd be good pay, and, a certain amount of prestige. How about it? Looks good, but I never aim to hook up with anybody. Understand me. You'll be an assistant, not a partner, Joe Carden said. I don't hook up with anybody either, as you so aptly express it. Well, I dunno. I do, Carden said. You'll come with me right now, and leave that silly cap pistol there on the grass. Pick up my umbrella and come along. Ain't I got anything to say about it? Not a word, Carden replied happily. You may refuse if you wish, and I'll spread it all over town how you tried to hold me up and how I took your gun away. And in addition to that, I may be tempted to handle you myself. Burke noticed at that instant that Joe Carden had bent forward and that his eyes were glittering. Burke did not like the glitter. It would be a good job, too, to work for a top-notcher. The misery of his existence might be removed. Perhaps he would have ample funds with which to purchase the fashionable raiment he craved. Even at that day, Burke longed to be Nifty Burke. Well? Carden snapped. You've got a man, Burke answered. Where is that umbrella? Carden motioned toward it, and Burke picked it up and opened it and held it over the head of his new employer. They walked quickly along the path toward the nearest exit of the park. Burke watched Joe Carden from the corners of his eyes. Carden was humming as happily as though out strolling on a charming afternoon. Burke had heard a lot about Carden. Where he had come from, no man knew. He was more than a match for the police, and some of his escapades kept the underworld in throes of laughter. He was a peculiar sort of individual, hard as nails at times, and at other times going far out of his way to aid some unfortunate who was deserving. He had supplied attorney's fees for more than one man, had cared for families of men sent up the river. He made few close friends, and played the game alone. That was one reason the police could not catch him, though they knew him well. Once Joe Carden had been arrested on a charge of vagrancy, and he had gone into court and proved that he had a snug fortune properly invested and lived on the proceeds. They traced the fortune and discovered that it was honest money that had been inherited from an uncle who had been a recluse. So Joe Carden had laughed at the officers and laughed at them now, even at those who knew him for what he was and yet could not prove it, and Detective Sam Martyr, who had arrested him for vagrancy and had thus let himself in for a lot of ridicule, swore to get him if it took years. Martyr even went as far as to construct elaborate traps, all of which Joe Carden dodged with consummate skill. Burke thought of these things as they went from the park and then along the avenue. Presently, Carden led the way into a cross street, and after a time stopped before a doorway and let himself in with a latchkey. He bade Burke close the door and showed him how to snap on the lights. They went up the stairs and unlocked another door. Burke found himself in the living room of a suite furnished in an artistic manner. Here we are, Joe Carden announced. And kindly remember that from this time forward you are my man. I'll break you in gradually. If you turn out to be valuable to me, you'll not regret it. But watch your step, Burke. There are some peculiar things in these rooms, and curiosity is punished at times. I getcha, Burke said. I may say that your language is scarcely elegant, Burke, and your clothing is not of the best either. We can attend to the clothing tomorrow, but I suppose it will take me some time to change your language. Joe Carden tried it for 6 months, and then gave it up as a bad job. Burke continued to use a language of his own, not exactly a bad language, but one through which idiomatic remarks were scattered generously. But Burke was not dismissed. He formed a sincere attachment for the Crook comedian and became a man of value to him. Burke did have genuine courage, as Joe Carden soon discovered, and also a certain amount of originality and ability. They worked well together, and profitably. Chapter 2. A deal is made. Almost every city in the United States, except a few of the quickly built ones of the West, has a few narrow, crooked streets that have resulted from paths made in haphazard fashion in the old days. On a certain afternoon, 6 months after his meeting with Burke, Joe Carden stood at the curb in such a street. He was dressed in inconspicuous clothing and wore a cap instead of a hat. He stood with a cigarette drooping from one corner of his mouth and with shoulders stooped. He did not look at all like the debonair Joe Carden that so many men knew, and he did not wish to so look. Carden glanced down the street as he held his cupped hands before his face and lighted the cigarette afresh. Ragged children were playing happily between the two sidewalks. Pushcart vendors were making their way slowly through the throng, on the alert to catch thieving young fingers. Here and there foreign women leaned from second-story windows and shrieked to one another concerning the unimportant happenings of the day. Halfway down the block, on the opposite side of the street, was an old antique shop with a battered sign over its door and crusted dirt on its windows. The shop had been there for years and was the property of an old man known as Razelus. The police often had entertained certain suspicions regarding this Razelus, but never had they been able to catch him at a moment when he was breaking the law. He was suspected of being a fence, and in reality was one, though not a fence of the ordinary variety. Razelus did not deal in stolen rings and purloined plate. He dealt in antiques, as the sign said. He was known to many wealthy collectors, some of them men who did not care how they obtained an object of art so long as they got it. It was the shop of Razelus that the Crook comedian was watching, as he pretended to be loafing near the curb while enjoying his cigarette. Before the shop in the narrow street was a gorgeous limousine that took up almost half the width of the thoroughfare. Joe Carden knew that the car was the property of one Roger Belcher, a new millionaire regarding whose operations in the realm of business many nasty things were being said. Roger Belcher, having made his pile and formulated plans for keeping it a big one, was attempting to break into the inner ranks of worthy society by the art route. In his great mansion far uptown, Roger Belcher had a gallery that contained some of the world's masterpieces. Some of them had been acquired by shady means, but that did not annoy Belcher. As Joe Carden watched, the man came from the shop of Razelus, and Razelus himself, carrying a small bundle, followed at his heels. Roger Belcher got into the limousine. Old Razelus handed him the package and stood bowing and rubbing his hands, and the big car dashed suddenly up the street, scattering the playing children and causing several mothers to shriek in foreign words their fear and anger. Joe Carden waited until the street had regained its normal aspect, and then he yawned and tossed his cigarette away. He glanced up and down the thoroughfare as if expecting some acquaintance to meet him, and so made sure that no officer of the law to whom he was known was in the neighborhood. Then Joe Carden walked to the corner, crossed the street, and went down the other side, came to the door of the antique shop of old Razelus, and darted inside. A little bell tinkled somewhere in the back as the door was closed. Razelus was not in sight. Joe Carden supposed that he was in the little rear room that he used as office and living quarters. Carden had never been inside the shop before, but he had heard about that little rear room. The majority of those in the underworld knew about it. The walls could have told police officials many interesting facts. Could they have spoken? While waiting for the antique dealer, Joe Carden glanced rapidly around the shop. Old furniture, objects of art, paintings, ancient books, bits of statuary, all were jumbled together and covered with dust. The Crook comedian smiled a bit as he looked at the stock, and then he turned around quickly at the sound of the old dealer's step behind him. Razelus walked forward slowly, rubbing his hands, his little eyes glittering in a peculiar way. He was dressed in a rusty black coat that was much too long for him, and he wore a black skull cap and enormous spectacles. "The gentleman wishes to look at something in my stock?" old Razelus asked. Joe Carden stood with his fists against his hips looking down at him, trying to size up his man. He had spent considerable time, and Nifty Burke had spent time and money preparing for this affair, and the Crook comedian did not care to make a mistake that would endanger the success of his plans. "Yes, I wish something," Carden said. "In the furniture line, perhaps? I wish to talk to you first." A sudden gleam of suspicion came into the eyes of old Razelus, just long enough for Joe Carden to see it, and then fled again. "You wish to leave me an order for some certain thing?" Razelus asked. "Well, I wish to talk to you regarding some certain thing," Joe Carden answered. "But I'd rather not talk to you in here. Suppose we go into that little back room of yours." "To my office?" "My dear sir, I never take strangers into my office, you see," Razelus said, with a trace of fear in his manner. "I don't care to talk any other place," Joe Carden told him. "I'm no more anxious to have the police overhear me than you are. Do you understand?" "The police? I have nothing at all to do with the police," old Razelus declared. "I think that you have made some sort of a mistake. I'm an old antique dealer trying hard to make my living. I can hear better comedy than that in a cheap vaudeville theater any day." Joe Carden interrupted. "Suppose we get down to business." "But I do not understand. Do you happen to know a tall man who squints his left eye all the time when he talks?" the Crook comedian asked. "Well, I am a friend of his." Carden spoke of a character well known in the underworld, from whom he had obtained certain valuable information regarding old Razelus, and the manner of the dealer in antiques changed suddenly as he stepped nearer Carden. "Well, why did you not say so in the first place?" Razelus asked. "I am particular with whom I talk, especially when they want to talk in my office. Are you going to take me to your office, or are we going to stand here all day and blab?" Carden demanded. "Come this way, sir. I really cannot imagine what you wish to speak to me about in such a mysterious fashion. But if you are a friend of my old friend," Razelus led the way behind the counter and to the little room in the rear of the store, where there was a battered desk, 2 old chairs, more antiques, and more dust. Joe Carden happened to know that a hidden safe was there too, and that old Razelus kept his wealth in it. The Crook comedian sat down at one end of the desk, on one of the old chairs, and reached into his coat pocket to pull out a section of newspaper. "Razelus, do you ever read the Sunday papers?" he asked. "At times, sir, at times." In the illustrated section of one of them yesterday was an article about some rare art treasures a certain well-known collector obtained recently. "Did you read it?" "I seldom look at such things," Razelus declared. "Generally such articles are written by reporters who know nothing at all about art. In most cases I know more about the treasures than the men who describe them." "I suppose that is right," Carden assented. As a matter of fact, he knew that old Razelus was an expert on objects of art. There had been a time when Razelus had been an honest man and had worked in a big museum in Europe. "Well, I want to ask you something. This article says that Mr. Gordon Burlington, a wealthy man and a scholar, has just purchased a certain Chinese vase. I know of that vase and I have heard of his purchase of it," Razelus said. "Good enough. There is a picture of the vase here in the paper, and the article says that it is worth $20,000 at the least. Is that true?" "The value of such a thing scarcely can be set accurately," old Razelus explained. "It is worth the highest bid a collector will make. That vase is the only one of its kind in the world, as far as is known. It is typical of an era in art, but you would not understand if I explained. And I don't care particularly for any of that stuff," Carden told him. "I did not come here to listen to a lecture on Chinese art. What I want to know is this: is the vase valuable? Undoubtedly, it is a rare treasure. If you had it, could you sell it?" A sudden gleam came into Razelus's eyes again. 100 collectors were after it, and Mr. Burlington happened to get ahead of the others, he said. "I see. Then, if you had that vase, you could sell it easily. Razelus, what would that vase be worth to you? Put right down here before you on your desk? Razelus straightened his shoulders suddenly and blinked his eyes rapidly behind his big spectacles. You mean, stolen goods? He asked in a lower tone. I can have nothing to do with such things, my dear sir. Rats. You're talking to a man who knows a few things, Razelus. You've handled stolen art treasures before. That is your big game. There are wealthy collectors who get crazy to own certain things, and they'll buy them when and where they can, stolen or not, even if they have to hide them away afterward. You've dealt with a lot of them. Don't try to bluff me, Razelus. But I assure you, if you want to assume this attitude, I may as well go somewhere else and talk business, the Crook comedian declared, and he got up, put the newspaper into his pocket, and started toward the door. One moment, Razelus called. Come back and sit down. This vase, you have it. I can get it, Razelus chuckled. I am afraid not, he said. I happen to know that Gordon Burlington's art treasures are very well protected indeed. If he has that vase in his house, where I suppose it is, no 10 thieves in the world could get it, and anybody who tried to get it would be nabbed, young man. That part of it is my business, Joe Carden replied. I said that I can get the vase, and I can. Do you want it? But how could I dispose of it if I felt inclined to do business with you? It is a famous vase, and every collector in the world knows it. The theft of it would get wide publicity. If I sold it to anybody and it was traced back to me. You listen to me. I know a few things, Joe Carden said. I know, for instance, that Roger Belcher and Gordon Burlington are bitter enemies. Belcher hates Burlington because the latter has beaten him to a lot of art stuff and has made the remark that Belcher is ignorant and uncultured. And Burlington hates Belcher because he knows that Belcher is not a genuine art lover, but only a rich man trying to buy his way into select circles. And what of it? Razelus asked. This vase Burlington owns has been well advertised. He has been congratulated on getting it. Nothing would please Belcher more than to have that vase. Maybe he'd find it necessary to hide it, but he'd have the satisfaction of knowing that Burlington couldn't show it. And he'd pay a mighty good price to get that vase too, and you know it. Now, do you want to talk business with me? You could sell that vase to Roger Belcher within 24 hours after you got it in your hands. It is rather risky, young man. I suppose you never took risks before? Joe Carden said, grinning a bit. Maybe I'd better go elsewhere. Wait a moment. Just what is it that you are proposing? Razelus asked. Now we're getting at it. Do you want that vase? If you do, I'll get it for you, and quickly if you pay my price. Razelus, what is that vase worth to you? Put right before you here on your desk. Razelus blinked his eyes rapidly again and regarded Joe Carden carefully. How soon could you get it? He asked. Either tonight or tomorrow night. If you try it and fail, I must not be involved. You'll not be, but I am not going to fail, Joe Carden said. How much will it be worth to you? Talk sense, and talk quick. My time is valuable. It is a risky business, Razelus declared. I may fail to sell it again, you see, and then my money would be lost. I couldn't offer it for sale openly. I'll give you $500. Joe Carden smiled, got up again quickly and started toward the door. 500? I can see plainly that I've been wasting my time here, he said. Wait a moment, my dear young man. How much money do you want for the thing? Carden bent down toward him. $2,000, and not a cent less, he declared. You'll probably sell it within 24 hours for $15,000 or more, and your risk is small. You can sell it all right. But I couldn't think of paying you $2,000. Perhaps one. Goodbye, Razelus, Joe Carden exclaimed, and he started toward the door again. Wait, wait, Razelus implored, getting to his feet quickly. I am willing to make the deal. $2,000, if you bring that vase to me here. $2,000 as soon as I look it over and am sure that it is the right vase. You'll get the right vase, all right. When will you bring it to me? At 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll come to this little alley door. If I am not here at 4 o'clock, watch for me at the same time the morning following. And you have that $2,000 ready, Razelus. This is going to be a quick deal. Don't try to get cheap, for it'll not work. I'll pay you the money the moment I have my hands on the vase, Razelus replied. But you haven't told me your name? I don't know the man I'm dealing with. Oh, Smith will do, Joe Carden answered, grinning again. Names aren't necessary sometimes. As he spoke, he put a fresh cigarette in his mouth. For a moment his left sleeve slipped back. Old Razelus saw the purple scar on Joe Carden's wrist and blinked his eyes rapidly once more. Smith, eh? He chuckled after he had ushered Joe Carden to the front door and had watched him up the street. Not with that scar, young man. I've heard a lot about that scar. So I'm dealing with a famous crook comedian, am I? Well, the vase will be worth the money, and more if he can get it for me. Chapter 3. A Peculiar Robbery. Gordon Burlington stirred in his sleep, rolled over in the bed, fought against slumber like a man who half realizes that he is in danger, and finally opened his eyes. A dazzling light was shining straight into them. Burlington gave an exclamation and sat up in the bed, blinking his eyes to keep out the glare. He could not understand what it meant. Something seemed to be wrong, and then a voice came to his ears from behind the bright light. Take it easy, and don't speak a word unless you want a bullet in your system where it'll do the most harm. Burlington shuddered. His presence of mind was returning. He sensed now that there was an intruder in his chamber, and he felt a bit of fear. He guessed that the intruder was a criminal, and Burlington knew nothing of criminals except what he had read. He had an idea that all lawbreakers went around with a revolver held ready, eager for an excuse to take a human life. What? He managed to stammer. No talk at present, please. Put your hands up above your head and hold them there until I snap on the lights. Burlington did as he had been ordered. He heard the other man walk across the floor. There came a soft click, and the lights in the room flashed on. Gordon Burlington saw a man standing near the wall by the light switch. The man was tall and slender, wore ordinary dark clothes, and had a black mask over his face. Burlington shuddered when he saw the mask. It confirmed his worst fears. The intruder was a criminal, and Burlington was in grave danger. What do you want? The man in the bed gasped. Take it easy now. Get up and put on your dressing gown and slippers and be quick about it. And remember that I am holding this revolver, and that I am a dead shot. Burlington shuddered again. He swung his legs out of the bed, and with trembling hands picked up the dressing gown and drew it on, then managed to get the slippers on his feet. He looked up at the other man. You are, a criminal? He asked. A chuckle came from behind the mask, and the full, even voice replied to him. I'm called that in certain circles. I call myself something else, but it isn't necessary to mention it now. And what do you want? I came here for valuables, naturally. And how did you get into the house and into this room? Gordon Burlington asked suddenly, remembering something. I didn't think that a criminal. Didn't think anybody could get into your house at night, eh? Joe Carden asked him. I don't suppose an ordinary sneak thief could, my dear sir, but I am not an ordinary sneak thief, I assure you. I am always well prepared when I start out on a certain enterprise. I did not attempt to raise one of your windows, sir, and so turn in an alarm that would have brought the police down on me. Indeed? Burlington gasped. I merely cut out a pane of glass, and when I got through I was careful not to touch the casement. You see, Mr. Burlington, I know practically all there is to know about your burglar alarms, and when I came up the stairs a few minutes ago, I was very particular to avoid stepping on the 4th step from the bottom. Nor did I touch the railing on the landing, just where 9 men out of 10 would touch it. Your alarms are excellent, sir, but useless when a man has knowledge of them. And how did you discover these things? Sorry, but I can't answer that, Joe Carden told him. And I haven't time to talk about it either. I am here for business, not for a visit. What do you wish? You are going down the stairs with me, to your library, or whatever you call that big room where your safe is. You are going to walk one step ahead of me, and warn me regarding any traps you may have in the house. I think that I know all of them, but I'm not sure, and you are going to be very careful, for if you allow an alarm to be given, I'm going to fill you full of lead. Do you understand? I'll be careful about the alarms, Burlington promised. Very well, then we'll start. I'll snap out these lights and use the electric torch. If we should happen to run across a prowling servant, you'll call out immediately that everything is all right. And do not forget the revolver I'm holding. Gordon Burlington shuddered again as he started toward the door. Joe Carden snapped out the lights and followed at the other man's heels. Down the broad stairs they went, Burlington being careful to warn Carden, in whispers, about the alarms they passed on the way. On the lower floor they marched along the hall, and Burlington opened the door of the library and walked inside. "Do not step on that small rug," he whispered. "There is an alarm plate beneath it." "Good thing you warned me," Joe Carden replied. "If an alarm goes off, they may get me, but I'll get you first, and don't you forget it. Draw all the shades and snap on the lights." Gordon Burlington did as Carden commanded. He was growing more frightened every minute. Perspiration was standing out on his forehead, and he was trembling. He recalled all the stories he had ever read about the brutalities of criminals and of wealthy men being found dead in their own homes, nobody knowing the assassin or the motive. Gordon Burlington was not ready to die, though he was close to 60. The shades drawn and the lights turned on, Burlington faced Joe Carden and trembled as he saw the latter's eyes glittering through the mask. What do you want to steal?" Burlington asked. "If it is money you want, eh?" "Thanks, but I don't want any of your money," Joe Carden said. "Then what?" "You have other things worth taking, haven't you? A certain Chinese vase, for instance." "The vase?" Burlington gasped. "Surely you would not take my vase?" "I will give you money. Much money." "I came for the Chinese vase, and I want nothing else," Joe Carden declared. "Do not take it, man," Burlington begged. "I have been trying for several years to get it, and finally succeeded. 100 men were after it. It isn't only its value. Perhaps you would not understand, but I love that vase. I look at it by the hour. To me it is one of the greatest works of art in the world. I know all about it. I'll give you its value in other things. But please do not take the vase." "And what good would it do you?" Burlington asked. "You would not dare offer it for sale. It is the only one of its kind in the world. Every collector would know it was stolen. You couldn't sell it. I'll take care of that part of it. All you have to do is get me the vase," Carden said. "And I don't intend to stand here and talk about it either. If you force me to use this revolver—" "Wait, Burlington implored. "Won't you take money?" "I came for the vase, and that is what I want." Gordon Burlington sighed and turned away. He walked across the room to a little cabinet. In the cabinet, on a shelf, was a vase that Joe Carden identified at once from the pictures he had seen. "Be quick about it," he urged. "And remember what I said about setting off alarms. I'll fill you full of lead." Burlington shuffled back to his desk and got a key from a drawer there. He unlocked the cabinet and took out the vase and carried it carefully to the table in the middle of the room. He sat down, the vase in his hands, and gloated over it. There were tears in his eyes as he looked up at Joe Carden again. "I don't suppose you understand what it means for a man to love things like that," he said. "Let me ask you again to take something else and leave me this vase. I can get you money, or jewels." "No use in arguing with me," Carden said. "I came for the vase, and that's all. And I do know how you feel. I know that you are a genuine art lover. But I've got to have the vase. You can't sell it. Don't worry about that, and let's have an end of this talk. Wrap that vase up in a piece of newspaper." "That precious vase in newspaper? That's the way I want it," Carden declared. I don't care to advertise what I'm carrying around. And keep on remembering what I said would happen to you if you try any tricks on me. I may mention that my assistant is standing just outside the window through which I entered, in case he is needed." Burlington started to beg and plead again, but Joe Carden would not listen. The art lover wrapped his precious vase in newspaper, and Carden took the package from him. "Now you'll walk with me to the window, and there I'll tell you something interesting," Joe Carden said. "Snap off the lights, and we'll use my torch again." Burlington was almost sobbing now, and the Crook comedian knew that he had nothing to fear from him. But he wanted to make sure. "In case you should touch anything that will send in an alarm, the vase will be gone forever," he said. "If I am disturbed while I am here, I shall simply smash this vase into 1,000 pieces." "You'd smash the precious vase, the only one of its kind in the world?" Burlington gasped. "Into 1,001 bits, if I am bothered. So don't set off any alarms." I'll not attempt it," Burlington said. "Though I cannot have my vase, I do not want it destroyed and lost to the world. But if you'd let me give you money or jewels, things that you could sell. We've had enough of that talk. Come along." Once more they went through the hall, this time to the front of the house, and into a room to one side. There was the window that had been cut, the shade pulled down and fastened. Joe Carden stopped just in front of it and hissed peculiarly. "On the outside," Nifty Burke answered. Then Carden turned and stepped close to Gordon Burlington again. "I'll make a deal with you, Mr. Burlington," he said. "It would be natural if you telephoned the police as soon as I went away. You may, if you wish. But if you do not report this affair to the police for 3 days, I'll return your vase." "Return it? What do you mean?" "Just that. Forget this incident for 3 days, and on the 3rd night from now I'll come back with your vase, else telephone you and return it in some other manner. I want your vase for only a few days, understand? But no argument, and I'll tell you nothing more. In fact, I insist on this deal. I need the vase for a time, but you are a genuine collector and should not be robbed of it forever. Keep this robbery to yourself, and I'll return the vase as soon as possible. Say 3 nights from now. Telephone the police, and you'll never see the vase again, nor will any other man, for I'll smash it to bits and throw the bits into some trash can." No, I'll do as you say," Burlington gasped. "Very well. I know you are a man of your word. Go back to bed now and don't worry about your vase. You'll take good care of it? You may be sure of that, and I'll keep my word too. I may be what you call a criminal, but I always keep my word." Joe Carden extinguished his torch, raised the shade slowly and carefully, and got through the window. Nifty Burke was waiting for him in the darkness close to the side of the house. "Get it?" he asked. "Easy," Joe Carden declared. "Everything running along according to plans. Now we'll get down to the Razelus shop and begin to collect." "This is going to be some stunt, Nifty." "You said it, boss. And in the end, nobody will be stung except dirty thieves. I wouldn't steal from a regular crook, of course, Nifty. But take a man like Razelus, who pretends to be an honest citizen and is not. I certainly do love to sting a man like that. And Roger Belcher with his fortune and his big house, pretending to be one of the big men of the city, yet as crooked as you can find them. I certainly do love to sting that sort of man too. An honest crook comes out in the open, admits he is a crook and sticks to it. But men like Razelus and Roger Belcher—" "Serve 'em right," said Burke. Chapter 4. Detective Sam Martyr. Joe Carden and Nifty Burke slipped away from the Burlington mansion and hurried down a side street, keeping in the shadows as much as possible, alert for the sight of a patrolman. They darted across a wide avenue and went down another side street, walking block after block rapidly, speaking but little. And after a time they came to a car line and waited for an owl car. They rode toward the lower end of the city. Leaving the car, Joe Carden went ahead some distance until he reached the narrow, crooked street where Razelus had his shop. He paused in front of the shop to light a cigarette, stepped close to the window and tried to see inside. There was not even a light in the front of the shop. He went around the corner and came to the mouth of the alley, into which he darted. Along it, he slipped in the darkness, stopping now and then to listen. Nifty Burke entered the alley from the other end, met the Crook comedian within a dozen feet of the rear door of Razelus's shop. "4:15, boss," he whispered. "I told him 4 o'clock, so we'd better wait a few minutes. I suppose you remember your instructions?" "Sure. Never forget orders," Nifty Burke said. "Did you prowl your end of the alley?" "Certainly." "Not as much as a cat in it, boss. If this old bird tries to double-cross us—" "I don't think there is much danger, Nifty. Razelus really wants this vase. He pays me 2,000 for it, and he probably will sell it for 15,000 or more. There'll be no double-cross when Mr. Razelus has a chance to make a fortune like that on a quick deal. And he'd think twice, I believe, before trying it on me. You see, Nifty, when I left him, I accidentally exposed the scar on my left wrist and let him know my identity. I get you, boss. He'll be afraid of a trick, afraid I'll try to sell him a fake vase or something like that. But he'll not call in the police, you may be sure. There'll be a trick, all right, but not the one he is planning on." Joe Carden chuckled softly, and an answering chuckle came from Nifty Burke. They made themselves comfortable and waited, watching the ends of the alley, ready to get in a more secure position if an officer on the beat came walking through. Finally, Joe Carden pressed Burke's arm and they got up and went to the rear door of the shop. Carden knocked, waited a moment, and knocked again. There was a short wait, and then the door was opened softly and for a space of 6 inches. Carden saw that a chain held it in that position. Razelus was not the man to take chances at that hour. "It's Smith," Carden said. "Oh, yes, Smith," Razelus grunted. "You've got it?" "I have. Let me in and I'll put it on your desk, as I said." Razelus took off the chain and opened the door wider. Joe Carden darted inside. Razelus would have closed and bolted the door again, but Nifty Burke held it open and squeezed through. "My assistant," Joe Carden explained. "It's all right, Razelus. We mean to deal fairly with you and expect you to do the same with us. If you've tipped this to the police—" "I haven't. It is fortunate for you that you have not. My assistant is keen with a knife and always carries a pet knife around with him. Now, let's get down to business. We're in a hurry to get away from here. Turn on more light." There was a candle burning on the battered desk. Razelus turned on a single incandescent light and blew out the candle. "Let's see it," Razelus said. "Take it easy," Carden advised him. "You're going to see it, all right, but I'm not forgetting our little deal. You've got the money ready? You can have it the minute I'm satisfied that the vase is all right." "It's all right. I don't deal in fake antiques," Joe Carden said, laughing lightly. He unwrapped the vase and put it on the desk. Razelus sat down and clutched the precious art object in his hands. Into his eyes came a gleam of pleasure. Razelus knew an object of value when he saw it. "Well, is it the vase?" Joe Carden demanded. Razelus did not answer at the time. He turned the vase up and inspected the bottom of it. Near one edge was a tiny mark that Razelus knew should be there if the vase was genuine. "Yes, it is the vase," he replied. "How on earth did you get the thing?" "That's none of your business, Razelus. But I don't mind telling you that Mr. Burlington gave it to me," Carden replied, chuckling once more. "Gave it to you? I see him." "Nevertheless, he did. Well, if you're satisfied that the vase is all right, suppose we end the deal. 2,000 was the price, Razelus." "Yes, but I was sorry 10 minutes after you had gone that I had promised to pay that much," Razelus declared. "I am running a great risk. It won't do you any good to talk along that line. You'll only be wasting time. I've delivered the goods, and I expect you to pay for them. And hurry up about it." Razelus sighed and arose. He picked up the vase and went to a corner of the little rear room and put the vase on a packing case there. And then Carden, Crook comedian, 17, went back to them, fumbling in an inner pocket of his coat. "I am a man of my word," he said. "But how do I know that you won't take the vase away again after I give you the money?" "And I'm a man of my word," Joe Carden returned in decisive tones. "I'm not known as a double-crosser, Razelus, and I'd advise you not to intimate as much again." Razelus trembled and pulled the money out of his pocket. He sat down and counted it, and handed it to Joe Carden, who counted it for himself. "Correct," Carden said, "and you've got a bargain. Now that our deal is over, I don't mind telling you that I think I have." "But the deal isn't ended," Carden told him. "Not ended? Not ended? What do you mean? You have your money. And you promised us." "That part of the deal is ended, Razelus. I have the money, and you have the vase. We're quits there, all right. But the deal isn't ended, for all that. You'll understand later, Razelus. If you try any tricks, serve you right if I did," Joe Carden told him. "You're the worst kind of a crook, Razelus. You pose as an honest man, and you're anything but that. You haven't the nerve to come out openly and admit that you're crooked. Serve you right if I stung you good and plenty, and before I am done with you, I'm going to do just that thing." "What do you mean?" Razelus cried again. "You'll find out one of these days. But don't worry about the vase. Only I'd advise you to get rid of it as soon as possible. It's a bad thing to have around, Razelus." "Oh, I'll get rid of it. And at a handsome profit, I suppose. However, that is none of my business. I don't care if you sell the thing for $1 million. Now we'll leave you, Razelus. I don't like the way you spoke a moment ago. Threw a scare into you, did I? Well, I'm glad of it, Razelus. You're a dishonest crook. Take my advice. Get that vase out of your hands as soon as possible." Joe Carden and nifty Burke walked across to the door, and Razelus snapped off the electric light and took off the chain. He opened the door a couple of inches and listened. Then he opened it wider, and the crook comedian and his assistant slipped into the dark alley. They walked down it slowly, alert, listening as they approached the street. "We scared the old boy," Burke whispered. "Think our little scheme will work?" "You know it will, boss. He'll break his neck to sell that vase as soon as he can." "Well, that's what we want him to do," Carden said. "We'd better part here, Nifty. Get home as quickly as you can, and be careful." Nifty Burke hung back in the shadows. Joe Carden stepped into the street and hurried along the walk. He kept in the darkness as much as possible until he reached the first wide avenue. He did not care to be observed in that part of town. Down the avenue he hurried toward the place where he had his rooms. And suddenly, around a corner, came the man he wished most to avoid, Detective Sam Martyr. There was no chance for Joe Carden to dodge the officer without attracting attention. So he walked forward boldly, puffing at a cigarette, as though he did not care whether a score of detectives were in the neighborhood. "Hello? How's the boy sleuth?" the crook comedian asked. "Out a little late, aren't you?" Martyr countered. "Taking a walk for your health, I suppose." "You've guessed it. The night air is bad at times," the detective insinuated. "I'm not afraid of it, Martyr. As long as you're out in it, you know." "I'm out on business. Are you?" "Oh, I'd not say that," said Carden. "No law against a gentleman walking around at 4 in the morning, is there?" "No law against a gentleman doing it, I believe." "Inclined to be nasty, are you? Want to arrest me for vagrancy again?" Detective Martyr's face grew purple with sudden wrath. He stepped closer. "Have your little joke while you can," he said. "I know you for what you are, Carden, and sooner or later I'm going to catch you with the goods. I'm going to see you up the river in the big stone house one of these days. No crook can get fresh with me and get away with it." "Insinuating that I am a crook?" Carden asked. "I'm not insinuating it. I'm telling you, to your face," the detective declared. "I'm willing to admit that you're clever, but other clever men are behind the bars. And that's where I'm going to put you, Joe Carden, before I'm done with you." "A valiant ambition, I'm sure," Carden said, laughing. "Laugh while it's in your system. You'll not be laughing one of these days," Martyr told him. "You amuse me, Martyr." Carden said. However, it grows late, and I must be on my way. Farewell, Martha, and don't let your anger give you a stroke of apoplexy. It would be a sad loss for the police department. There'd be nobody left to give your fellow officers a good laugh now and then. Since you don't intend to arrest me for vagrancy again, I'll be on my way. Joe Carden chuckled again and whirled around to continue up the street. He felt that he had carried off the encounter very well indeed, but he would rather have avoided it. Martha was a man of talent in his chosen profession. Joe Carden knew he was no ignorant police detective. Martha had both courage and brains. Rather have some other chap on my trail, but I'm not worrying any, Carden told himself. One thing bothered him, however. He was certain that Martha did not know his present place of residence, and he did not want him to know it. He could not be having the detective shadowing his domicile continually and knowing every time he went in and came out. If Martha discovered Carden's address, the Crook comedian would have to move, and he was comfortably situated. So, if Martha made an attempt to follow him now, Joe Carden would have to dodge him. And at the corner he made sure that Martha would make such an attempt. Shadowing me, is he? Carden mused. Have to dodge him, that's all. He darted up the street and turned the next corner. And he knew that he had not shaken off Martha. The detective was shadowing him with all the skill of which he was master, on a trail and determined to follow it to the end. Joe Carden went on along the street, in a direction away from his rooms. He turned down a cross street, seeking a place where he could hide until Martha had passed him, and finding nothing that would serve for the purpose. Into another street he went, and finally back to the avenue, and there he stepped into an all-night restaurant and purchased a package of cigarettes he did not need. But Martha did not lose him. Carden saw the detective across the street waiting. Determined to stick, is he? The comedian said to himself. Well, I can't be running around all night dodging him. Out into the street he went again, and straight up to Martha. Hanging around this street regularly? Carden asked. I thought cops walked beats. Oh, I'm walking a beat, all right. Trying to shadow me, are you? Want to know where I live? I don't care much, Martha, but I like to annoy you. Follow, if you like. I can stay awake as long as you. Yes? You heard me? Carden paused to light a cigarette and then swung off up the street. Martha followed deliberately, openly, not caring whether Joe Carden observed him or not. Nor did Carden walk swiftly. He prowled around the neighborhood for half an hour, walking around block after block, with Detective Sam Martha always less than half a block behind. And suddenly the Crook comedian came to an open doorway that led to a cheap lodging house. He darted inside and hurried up the stairs. There he reconnoitered. Nobody was in the tiny office. Carden darted down the hall noiselessly, opened the window there, got out upon the fire escape landing and closed the window again, then went swiftly down the steel ladder. He found himself in a court which had an outlet to an alley. Through the darkness Joe Carden hurried, and so came to the street again. Martha was not to be seen. Talking to the landlord, I suppose, and describing me, Carden thought. Well, that will keep him out of mischief for a few minutes. Down the cross street he hurried again, and back to the avenue. He made sure that Martha was not shadowing, and then he hurried to the building where he had rooms. Nifty Burke was already there, pacing the floor nervously. I was beginning to wonder what had happened to you, boss, he said. Brother Martha was trying to find out where we lived, that's all, Carden replied. That guy makes me feel shivery at times, Nifty Burke admitted. The other day he gave me the stony stare. Well, watch out for him. We don't want to move, you know, and that's what we'll have to do if he discovers where we live. Now I'm going to get some sleep. And you get up early and do as I told you. You can depend on me, boss, Burke replied. You haven't forgotten orders. You can bet I haven't. And don't forget to telephone as soon as you know about things, Carden added. I'll be on the job, boss. And I'll be waiting for that phone message. If it doesn't come in a reasonable length of time, I'll join you. You can get 3 or 4 hours sleep if you turn in now. Nifty Burke hurried to his own bedroom, and Joe Carden undressed slowly in his, now and then looking at his reflection in the mirror and grinning at himself. Joe Carden was well satisfied with the way things were going. Chapter 5. Another sort of deal. It was noon when Joe Carden crept from bed and hurried to his bath. He ordered breakfast sent up from the nearby restaurant that supplied meals, and ate it slowly and with evident relish. Nifty Burke, he knew, had been gone for several hours. Nifty had work to do, and after it was done he could rest while Joe Carden did his share. Just as the Crook comedian finished dressing, the telephone rang. "Hello?" he called. "Boss?" Nifty's voice asked. "Yes." "Good guessing, boss. I even followed our man home, and he's there now. I'll meet you where you said." "Be there in less than half an hour, Nifty." Carden hung up the receiver and observed himself in the full-length mirror in his bedroom. He was dressed in a blue suit of conservative cut, wore wide black shoes and a soft black hat. From a pocket of the coat, he took a policeman's shield, glanced at it, and returned it. Then, chuckling again, he started toward the door. Once more the telephone rang. Carden looked disconcerted as he took down the receiver. He feared what the message would be. "Hello," he called. "How is Mr. Carden today?" It was a woman's voice that asked the question, and Joe Carden shuddered as he heard. "Who is this?" he asked. "This is the nameless one, silly boy. You know perfectly well. I don't want to bother or annoy you, but I just thought I'd call up and say that I'm glad you were successful last night." "What do you mean?" Carden cried. "You know, the vase. I hope you sold it for a good round sum. Or perhaps you have turned art lover and are going to keep it for yourself. Pardon me, but I do not know what you are talking about," Carden said. "Naughty boy, you know very well." "When are you going to let me see you?" Carden demanded, changing his tone. "Someday perhaps, but not now. Goodbye." And there came a soft snap from her end of the line that told she had hung up the receiver. Joe Carden dropped weakly into the nearest chair, almost unnerved. More than 3 months before it had started, this woman had called and said that she was the nameless one. She seemed to know every move the comedian made. Every 2 or 3 days she would get Joe Carden on the telephone and speak of things he believed no person knew save Nifty Burke and himself. He had tried to trace her calls and had found that they came from public pay stations. What was her object? She had not attempted blackmail or anything of the sort. She had refused to let Carden meet her. She had said that she admired many of the things he had done, but did not care to meet him personally. Joe Carden was beginning to fear her. She seemed to know everything that he did, and he was haunted by the idea that some fine day she would make demands that he would have to grant to protect himself. But as yet she had been nothing but pleasant, had voiced no threat of any nature. "She must be shadowing me closer than Sam Martyr ever did," Carden told himself. "Well, I suppose I'll understand it someday, and I'll wager that I'll not like it when I do." Take this last message of hers, for instance. The affair of the Chinese vase had been planned carefully, and Joe Carden failed to understand how she could have learned anything concerning it. The more he thought about it, the more he worried. It would have been bad enough to have had some person he knew aware of his nefarious actions. It was a great deal worse to be at the mercy of some mysterious stranger. Carden left his apartment and hurried down to the street. 2 blocks away he engaged a taxicab, and in this he rode uptown to a certain square. There he paid the chauffeur and dismissed the cab and walked another block, where Nifty Burke met him on the corner. "Well?" Carden asked. "Razelus must have got busy early this morning," Burke reported. "I was on the job early and watched. Roger Belcher got down there about 10 o'clock and was inside the shop for an hour. He drove away and went to his bank, me after him in a taxi. Then he went back to the old shop again. That bird of a Razelus probably made him pay in cash instead of with a check." "Undoubtedly," Carden said. "Belcher came from the shop the last time with a small package that was about right to hold the vase. I followed him again, and he drove straight home. He was there a few minutes before I telephoned, and I think he's there yet." "Good enough. Go home, Burke, and get some sleep. I'll be back there in a couple of hours or so. See anything of Marta? Not a glimpse, and I was keeping my eyes open for him too. Nifty Burke hurried away, and Joe Carden walked to the other corner of the square and got another taxicab. The address he gave the chauffeur was within a block of the residence of Roger Belcher. Carden sank back against the cushions and puffed at a big black cigar. He wanted to look like an ordinary police detective, and he hoped that he did. He was going to call on Mr. Belcher and tell that gentleman a few things, and maybe ask a question or two. Reaching his destination, he paid the chauffeur and walked slowly up the famous avenue. The mansion of Roger Belcher had an atmosphere of money about it, yet to Joe Carden, who knew a few things about architecture, it was no less than an atrocity. Carden did not hesitate. He passed through the bronze gates and hurried up the front steps, having made sure that there was nobody in the neighborhood, as he did not want anyone to observe him. He rang the bell and waited. "I want to see Mr. Belcher," he told the servant who answered the ring. "I am afraid that he is busy, sir," the servant retorted, sizing up Joe Carden and sniffing a bit. "He's not too busy to see me," Carden persisted. "Tell him that it is a man from police headquarters who wants to warn him about his art stuff." His statement seemed to impress the servant, who immediately ushered Joe Carden into a waiting room and departed. Within 5 minutes, he had returned. "Mr. Belcher will see you, sir," he said. Joe Carden followed him through the hallway and up the stairs to the second floor. The apartment into which he was shown was a sort of glorified office, with valuable tapestries on the walls and furniture of the heaviest mahogany. Roger Belcher sat before his massive desk, puffing at a cigar and frowning after the accepted manner of a king of finance. Joe Carden, however, failed to be impressed. He chuckled softly to himself, though his manner was courteous in the extreme as he crossed the room and bowed to the master of the house. "The servant says that you are from police headquarters," Belcher snapped. "What do you wish with me, please?" Joe Carden sat down leisurely and glanced across the long desk at his man. "Mr. Belcher, you are known as a patron of the arts," he said. "It is common knowledge that you purchase art treasures whenever you have the chance, and now have quite a collection." "Got the finest private collection in town, bar one, and I'll have that beaten inside another year," Belcher growled. "Exactly, sir. I want to warn you that there are some clever thieves at work who make a specialty of art treasures." Belcher threw back his head and laughed raucously. "Young man, I do not worry about such persons," he said. "I have my collection well protected." "Of course, I know exactly how it is protected," Joe Carden said. "Your scheme of protection is an excellent one, but these thieves are unusually clever, I am given to understand. My dear sir, I defy any thief in the world to get away with any of my treasures without sounding an alarm that will cause a riot," Belcher declared. "I have paid special attention to the matter of protection, an additional precaution to the insurance I carry. Some of my things are worth more than any amount of money, and insurance would scarcely compensate me were they stolen. I'm pleased that your department should take this interest in me, but I feel confident that I shall suffer no loss." "Pardon me, Mr. Belcher," Joe Carden said, "but you are not the only collector in the city who has that idea. And just last night, a certain one suffered a great loss." "You amaze me." "It is the truth, I assure you. You are acquainted with Gordon Burlington, are you not?" "Oh, I know of him," Belcher admitted, showing plainly that the mention of Burlington's name annoyed him. "Recently he purchased a certain Chinese vase, the only one of its kind in the world, and one of great value." "I know of it." "And last night it was stolen," Joe Carden said. "Stolen!" Belcher cried. He overacted a bit, and Joe Carden was quick to notice it. The Crook comedian knew at once that Belcher was aware of the theft of the vase, and that Nifty Burke had guessed correctly when he said that Belcher had purchased it. "Yes, it was stolen," Carden said. "And we are informing all collectors and lovers of art objects to be careful in their purchases in the near future. No real collector, no man who knew about such things, would buy that vase," Belcher declared. "They'd know, of course, that it was stolen goods. Joe Carden grunted. Some man with money enough might buy it just to possess it, though he would not dare show it to his friends or exhibit it in a museum. That might be possible, of course. Some man who hated Gordon Burlington, let us say, might purchase it just to have the laugh on Burlington. For instance, you might do such a thing. I beg your pardon? It is well known in certain circles that you have no love for Burlington, Mr. Belcher. I have not. That is true. I think he's an arse, if you want to know. And you'd buy the vase if you got the chance, eh? But it is stolen goods, you know. I'd have small protection if I did such a thing. Mr. Belcher, I happen to know that you did just that thing. Joe Carden's voice rang out, and Belcher sat up straight in his chair. What do you mean? He cried. Do you want me to call a servant and have you shown the door? I scarcely think you'll do that, Mr. Belcher. It is not necessary that what I know goes further. Suppose you explain yourself. I know of the deal, that is all. I know where you got the vase, but do not blame Razelus, for he did not betray you. He is afraid for his own skin, if you ask me. And you think that I have bought a stolen vase? Is that it? Roger Belcher demanded. But neither his words nor his manner appeared to disconcert Mr. Joe Carden. I know that you bought it, Carden said, and I don't care a lot. I can forget it, of course, and I'm really making the rounds of all collectors of art objects to sound a warning. So, if you just be careful, young man, I have some influence in this city. Suppose I take a notion to have you kicked out of your job. You might do it, sir. But there is a district attorney who happens to be honest, and I understand that he has small love for you. I believe he recently made the statement that you were a business crook and that he'd get you sooner or later. Yes, you might have me kicked out. In time. But before you did. Joe Carden stopped in the middle of the sentence, took a cigarette from his pocket, and lighted it deliberately. So you are here to blackmail me? Belcher asked. My dear sir, I am here to do nothing of the sort. I am here to warn you about that vase. As a friend, let me give you a tip to keep it well hidden. I'm the only man, in addition to Razelus and yourself, who knows about the affair. One other may have an idea, but he is a friend of mine, also a busy man. Well, we may as well come down to cases, Belcher said. I find it always is the better way. How much do you want? I haven't said that I want anything. Nonsense. What's your price? Since we are alone, I don't mind telling you that I have the vase, but all the cops in the world couldn't find it. Possibly not. But old Razelus could be forced to confess that he sold it to you, to save his own hide. I have plenty of money. I could take care of Razelus if he was threatened. Not if he had the proper amount of fear in his heart, Joe Carden said. He could go on the stand and make a jury believe that he was an innocent purchaser and that he had sold the thing to you for a small sum, not knowing what it really was, but that you did know when you bought it. Small sum, eh? You paid in cash, didn't you? That was a mistake. How can you show that it was not a small sum? Carden asked. All right. If I buy you, do you stay bought? I don't want you to buy me. You may pay me a fee for professional advice if you like. What's the advice? Belcher wanted to know. Keep that vase where it cannot be found readily, until this thing blows over. Let me show you how to hide the thing. I'll take care of the vase. What's the fee? Suppose you mention it. $1,000, Belcher said. I've bought police officers before, and that is the standard price. Joe Carden looked serious for a moment. He had fought against police officers all his life, yet he respected them as a body of hard-working, honest men, save for a scoundrel now and then, such as might be found in any line of work. And he did not like to hear a man like Roger Belcher intimating that police officers could be bought wholesale. Very well, he replied. Cash, of course. And I'll see that everybody follows a blind trail. I'll have them looking for that vase in Europe within 10 days. Good enough. Come here tomorrow at this time, and I'll have the coin for you. Joe Carden grinned. I'm not making any deals tomorrow. It's my day off, he announced. Very well, but the 1,000 is all that you get, young man. Don't come running to me every week or so for funds. The 1,000 closes the deal, Carden said. Belcher crossed the room to his safe, opened it, and returned with a sheaf of bills in one hand. He counted out $1,000 and tossed the currency across the table to Joe Carden. Don't even know your name, he growled. Smith will do, Carden replied, grinning. And now that we are partners in crime, you'd better listen to my advice. Where are you keeping the thing? I'll attend to that. And I'll bet you're keeping it just where a cop would look the first thing. Give me a glance at it, will you? It must be a peach to be worth so much. I saw something about it in the paper Sunday. Belcher regarded him for a moment, then got up and went to another big desk in one corner of the room. He opened a lower drawer and took out the vase. Joe Carden looked at it carefully, exclaiming at its beauty, and handed it back. I'd have to have a lot more money than I've got now before I'd pay a big sum for a thing like that, he said. Perhaps you don't understand such things. Possibly I do not, Carden replied, grinning a little. Well, I'll leave you now. No use wasting any more of your time. And don't you worry too much, Mr. Belcher. Don't worry at all. Everything will be strictly all right. There was a double meaning to that last remark, but Roger Belcher knew nothing of it. And Joe Carden went from the mansion and walked to the nearest corner, where he signaled the chauffeur of an unengaged taxicab. That Chinese vase has netted me $3,000 already, and I've only started, he told himself as the taxi carried him downtown. Some little vase. Chapter 6. Martyr on the Trail. The firm of Carden and Amp, Burke, rested the remainder of the day and spent the night in innocent slumber. In the morning, Joe Carden took his usual exercise bath and breakfast, and then grinned across the room at Nifty Burke. Time for the next move in the game, the Crook comedian said. I'll write the letters now, Burke, and then you'll go out and send them by messengers. Tomorrow should be our big day. I'll say so, Nifty Burke remarked. Joe Carden chuckled and turned to his desk. When he wrote, it was with his left hand, and in large characters. Handwriting so disguised that no expert could have attributed the authorship to him. The first letter was addressed to Razelus and read as follows. The writer of this letter knows all concerning a recent deal made by you, and regarding a famous Chinese vase. You have escaped prosecution heretofore, but you have gone a step too far this time. The details, if given to the police, would be enough to send you up the river for 10 years or more, and a certain well-known rich man with you. If you wish to escape this, put $1,000 in an envelope addressed to George X.Z. Brown, General Delivery, and mail it this evening. The letter will be called for at noon tomorrow. The matter ends if you do as I say. If you do not, the district attorney will be given some interesting information. Do not fail. Nothing can save you if you do, for the evidence is conclusive. Joe Carden addressed and sealed the note, chuckled again, and looked across at Nifty Burke. A certain gentleman by the name of Razelus is going to throw a fit when he gets this, he said. Think he'll mail the coin? Yes, Carden replied. Either he'll mail it immediately through fear, or he'll try to work some game with the police, in connection with Belcher, and throw all blame on me. In that case, Nifty, the coin will be mailed, marked bills probably. You see, the police know that to catch me they must get me with the goods. I could call for mail addressed to George X.Z. Brown and declare that was a name I used in certain business matters. There is no law against using a name not your own unless you do it to defraud, public opinion to the contrary. To nail me, Nifty, they'd have to send money and afterward find it in my possession. Now I'll write another letter. He took another sheet of paper and indited an epistle to Roger Belcher. So you bought a stolen Chinese vase, did you? I know all the details. If you care to escape prosecution, put $5,000 in an envelope addressed to George X.Z. Brown, General Delivery, and mail it late tonight. The letter will be called for by noon tomorrow. If it is not received, the district attorney will learn several interesting things. The 5,000 is in addition to the 1,000 you so generously gave me yesterday. Here you are, Nifty, Carden said when he had finished. Go uptown some distance, get messengers from some central messenger station, and send these letters on their way. Then return here, and we'll pose as estimable citizens for the remainder of the day. Understand? I get you, boss. Your language is nothing if not expressive. Gosh, boss, I never could learn to sling good talk, Nifty Burke declared. Polite language doesn't seem to have any punch anyway. Slang for mine. A man can understand it. Joe Carden grinned. Nifty Burke was hopeless when it came to a proper regard for the English language, and the Crook comedian knew it. Burke hurried away with the letters, and Joe Carden paced the floor of his living room, puffing at a cigarette, and began planning things to be done after the affair of the Chinese vase was closed. He told himself that he was a peculiar sort of crook, since the robbery of honest men did not appeal to him. He was trying to justify his mode of life. I don't steal from honest men, and I wouldn't steal from a genuine crook, he declared to himself. Razelus is an old scoundrel who poses as a decent citizen, and Belcher is a high-class thief who lives an outwardly respectable life. I'm glad I'm putting over this little deal, but I must get that vase back to Burlington, if he's honest and decent. I don't want to sting him. He stood before one of the windows looking down at the street and watching the seething traffic. The telephone rang, and he hastened across the room to answer it, hoping that Nifty Burke was not reporting any trouble. Hello, he called. Good morning, Mr. Carden. It was the voice of the nameless one again, and Joe Carden once more felt an unexplainable fear tugging at his heart. Well, he snapped, we are not very polite this morning, are we? How is the genial crook comedian? What do you want? Carden demanded. Merely to ask how you are, and if you had an excellent breakfast, the soft voice replied. See here, Carden cried into the transmitter, this thing has to stop. If you wish to meet me, say so and I'll make an appointment. I can't be having you call up like this. Oh, somebody is grouchy this morning, is he? Said the soft voice. He doesn't like to talk to a mysterious woman? I do not, Carden said. How you happen to know all about my affairs is more than I can figure out. But I suppose you're going to blackmail me someday. So you think I'm that sort of woman, do you? Well, I'd like to come to an understanding with you. What is it that you want? Why do you call me up on the telephone continually just to inform me that you know all about my affairs? I don't want to talk to you when you're grouchy. I've never threatened you, have I? Perhaps this is just a lark with me, Mr. Joe Carden. I don't fancy it, Carden said. By the way, be careful in this vase affair, will you? I'd hate to have the police get you, you know. I probably would have difficulty telephoning you if you were in prison. And then the receiver at the other end of the line was put on the hook, and Joe Carden turned to pace the floor again, angrily this time. Confound the woman. He had a feeling that someday she would make demands, and that the longer they were delayed, the greater they would be. Take a week or so off and run her to earth, he growled to himself. Have to learn her identity, that's all. Worries the life half out of me. Meantime, Nifty Burke had journeyed uptown by means of the subway, traveling in a leisurely fashion and seemingly without important destination, though he was continually alert for sight of Marta or any other officer. He was careful, too. He did not care to be arrested on any charge whatever, searched, and those blackmail letters found in his pocket. That would lead to disaster for both himself and Joe Carden. Up on the street, finally he walked into a hotel and called for 2 telegraph messenger boys. When they arrived, he gave them the letters and generous fees, saw them depart, and then left the hotel by another exit. Nifty Burke's work was done for the day, according to the plans Joe Carden had made. He walked down the street for some distance, went downtown on a surface car by way of diversion, and left the car about 4 blocks from home. Burke was thinking, now, of a suit that he intended ordering, a gorgeous suit of ultra-fashionable cut with which he expected to startle his friends and acquaintances. and so he did not observe that Detective Sam Marter saw him and began shadowing him. Marter knew very well that Nifty Burke was a sort of valet to the Crook comedian, and guessed that he also was an assistant in nefarious schemes. Where Burke lived, there Carden lived, and that was what Sam Marter wanted to discover. If he could learn Carden's whereabouts without the comedian knowing it, he could watch. And he felt sure that there would come a time when Carden would make a wrong move, when Sam Marter could catch him with the goods and have revenge for that vagrancy fiasco. Nifty Burke was not in a hurry to get home, having ample time and nothing important to do, and so he led Sam Marter a merry chase. The detective, standing where he could not be seen, chewed his cigar and curled his lips in scorn as he watched Nifty Burke, in a haberdasher's, select some cravats that shrieked with colour. He followed Nifty on down the street and to a shoe store, and waited patiently while Nifty Burke looked over the stock and finally decided that there was nothing classy enough for him. He went on after Nifty again, and watched that young gentleman go into a pool hall and play billiards with a friend for an hour. Marter was growing disgusted, but he had no idea of leaving the chase. It had been said of Marter that he never quit until he had his man. He was known as one of the bulldogs of the force. Given a hold, he held on like grim death until the very last. Out on the street again, Nifty Burke touched a match to a cigarette and decided that he would go home. Sam Marter followed at a distance, sensing that he was about to the end of the chase, careful that he was not observed now, lest his work be ruined. Into a side street went Nifty Burke, and Marter, standing at the corner, saw him let himself in a certain door with a latchkey. "So that is where the Crook comedian hangs out, is it?" Marter asked himself. He knew the building, a 3-storied narrow one that housed only 6 tenants. He did not approach it now, for he was afraid that Joe Carden might see him, or come out in time to face him, and he knew that Carden would move overnight if that happened. Marter did not care to see the comedian at present. He wanted to know where he lived and so be prepared for the future. He would get permission from his superiors. He would glue himself to Joe Carden, and he would run him to earth at a moment when the evidence would be such that the Crook comedian would surely be convicted. "Make an ass out of me, Willie," Detective Sam Marter said as he started back down the street. "I'll investigate that house tonight and be sure he's there, and then..." Chapter 7. A Little Surprise. Roger Belcher read Joe Carden's letter, received by special messenger, then cursed loudly because the messenger had gone, and none of the servants could tell whence he had come. For a time Belcher sat before his big desk, his hands clenched, his brow wrinkled, thinking it out. The more he thought, the angrier he became. "Sting me, Willie," Belcher thundered to the 4 walls of his library. "Not much. I've beaten better men than this fellow, whoever he is. I was a fool to give him that 1,000 yesterday. He was no cop, of course. I must be getting old and slowing up." For half an hour he considered the situation from all angles, and then he went to his private telephone and talked to Razelus, ordering him to get a taxicab and journey to the Belcher residence as quickly as possible. Razelus was greatly disturbed by that message. He seldom got more than a couple of blocks from his old shop, and a journey uptown held terrors for him, but he knew better than to disobey. He locked the shop and hurried up the narrow, crooked street, engaged a taxicab, and whispered the address to the chauffeur as though it had been a crime. Then he sank back against the cushions and wondered what was going to happen. There had been no chance to tell Belcher over the telephone that he also had received a note regarding the Chinese vase, for Belcher had merely issued his orders and then had hung up the receiver. And Razelus was beginning to feel a great fear. A vision of prison was before him. He told himself that he had been a fool to make the deal for the vase, especially after he had seen the scar and knew that he was dealing with the Crook comedian. He might have known that Joe Carden would come out of it the victor. He had heard enough about Carden's operations along different lines. By the time the taxicab stopped before the mansion of Roger Belcher, Old Razelus was almost a nervous wreck. He paid the charges without argument, something highly unusual for him, and tottered up the steps to ring the bell. His voice quavered when he gave the servant his name, but he blinked his eyes when he saw the magnificence in that house and felt a certain amount of courage return to him. Surely a man who commanded such wealth as this could take care of himself and those involved with him. Perhaps the great Roger Belcher had some excellent plan for turning the tables on Joe Carden. The servant returned and ushered him along the hall and up the wide stairs to the library. Belcher was sitting before his desk, his face like a thundercloud. "Sit down, Razelus," he commanded, "and read this." He tossed Joe Carden's letter on the desk, and Razelus picked it up with trembling fingers and read. I have one, also," he said, and proffered his. Belcher read it swiftly and put it down on the desk beside his own. "Well?" he asked. I don't know what to make of it." "I do. We've been played," Belcher declared. "And no cheap crook can do that and get away with it." "What shall we do? Shall we send him the money?" Razelus asked. "Ass. Send him money today, and next week he'll be after more." "I want to know all about this, Razelus, just how you got that vase. You told me part of it, but I'm sure that you didn't tell all. If you want to get out of this scrape and save your money, talk, and don't omit a single detail." Razelus talked. In his thin, quavering voice he told of the visit of Joe Carden to his store, explained about the deal, even admitted that he'd obtained the vase for $2,000. "Very good," Belcher said, when he had concluded. "You'll have to pay me my money back, of course, and lose your $2,000. It'll teach you to be careful after this. Now describe this man to me." Razelus did, even to the scar, and Belcher sat up straight in his chair. "That's the man who came here yesterday, impersonated an officer, and got $1,000 from me," he said. "It's the same man, working his little game on both of us. Razelus, we're going to get him. There's a detective been after him for a long time. Name of Martyr," Razelus said. "But how can we call in the police without getting into trouble ourselves? Fix up a story, you fool. Leave it to me. The less talking you do, the better. And here is the story. This Joe Carden, as you say he is known, came to your shop and said that he had an old vase for sale. You were suspicious at first, but he told you that he needed funds and offered to sell it for $2,000. So you bought it. You did not know that it was stolen, of course. Did not think that it was especially valuable. And when I called to see about some old paintings, you showed me the vase, and I bought it for $2,500, let us say. Neither of us supposed that the thing had been stolen. Then this man came to me, pretending to be an officer, and I gave him bribe money, thinking to land him later. Then we got the letters and saw that he was no officer, but that he was a man trying to work a game on us. After receiving the letter, I examined the vase carefully and then sent for you, and we decided that it was the famous vase that recently was purchased by Gordon Burlington. So we called in the police. If you think it will be best. It's the only thing, Razelus. Turn the tables on him and get him arrested for theft and sent up. If we do anything else, he'll be bleeding us for years to come. We can get him all right, and a good job if we do." They debated it for a longer time, and then Belcher called police headquarters, gave his name, and said that he wished to speak to Detective Martyr. Martyr was in the office and answered the call at once. What he heard brought a smile to his lips. "I'll be right up, Mr. Belcher," he said, and went to get permission to attend to the matter. Martyr grinned openly when he had heard the stories Belcher and Razelus had to tell. He looked suspiciously at Razelus at first, but considered that the important thing was to get Joe Carden with the goods. "Now, what have you to suggest?" Belcher asked. "We want to land this man." "So do I," Martyr answered. "I've been after him for some time. He's clever, no use denying that, but we'll get him this time, for he's gone too far. I'll tell you this much, we have to get him right. He made a monkey out of me once, and I don't care to have him do it again." "Well, what's your plan?" Belcher asked. "You men must mail the money as he demands. Mark the bills, of course, so they can be identified. And you'll have to send the exact amount. You 5,000 and Razelus the 1,000. Why not just a blank letter? Razelus asked. Suppose you did and I got him when he asked for the mail? He'd say he used that name now and then, but that he did not expect anything from either of you. You can work that game with some men, but not with Carden, for he has money enough to put up a fight, and I want to get him right. But suppose we send the correct amount in marked bills. Then I can nab him while he has the money on him, and we can show these letters to prove that he expected to get the blackmail when he called at the post office. It'll make the evidence stronger, and it has to be strong. As for your coin, you'll get that back after the trial. I suppose that is the best way, Belcher agreed. We'll mail the letters and the correct amount tonight then. And there's something else to be done, so our skirts will be clean, Marta said. What's that? You say that the vase belongs to Mr. Burlington? It must be returned, and we'll learn when it was stolen. No report has been made of the theft. No report made? Belcher exclaimed. Burlington lost a thing like that and made no report. That sounds incredible. Do you suppose Burlington is in the game too? We may be able to tell that when we talk to him. By George, if he is. I suggest, sir, that we take the vase over to his house now, said Detective Marta, and then I will complete my plans for landing Joe Carden. Both of you are sure about that scar on his wrist, I suppose? They answered that they were. I've heard about that long purple scar, but never saw it, Marta said. You see, that will be the means of identifying him. He was alone with you, Razelus, and he was alone here with Mr. Belcher. He could simply deny the conversation, say it was somebody who looked like him, and a clever lawyer might make a jury believe it. But if you can swear to that scar, it will be different. We can swear to it all right, Belcher said. Then suppose we take the vase home now. Belcher ordered his car, got the vase from its hiding place, and they drove to the residence of Gordon Burlington. To say that Burlington was surprised at the visit would be to use weak language. He was astounded that Belcher, his enemy, would enter his house. He glared at Belcher, who returned his glare, nodded to Razelus, from whom he had purchased things from time to time, and looked to Marta to talk. Marta did. Mr. Burlington, we've got a vase here that belongs to you, the detective said. That is, we think it does. He unwrapped the vase, and Burlington uttered an exclamation as he examined it. Does it belong to you? Yes, Burlington said. Razelus purchased it from a man for a ridiculous sum, and sold it to Mr. Belcher. It appears that neither of them knew its real value. That is not surprising, Burlington said. Not every man knows the real value of objects of art. Belcher snorted in disgust and was about to speak when Marta prevented. Let me handle this, he begged. Mr. Burlington, we are on the track of the thief, and we wanted to return your vase immediately. And let me ask you a question. When was the vase stolen? Burlington told him. Can you tell me about it? How was the theft discovered? And by whom? I was on the spot at the time, Burlington said. The thief got into my house, seemed to know all about the alarm system. He woke me up and pointed a gun at me. He was masked and spoke in a low voice. He forced me to go downstairs and get him the vase, and then to walk with him to the window through which he escaped. And how is it that you have not reported the robbery? Detective Marta demanded. Because he said that if I did not report it, he would return the vase in 3 days. And I wanted to spring a little trap of my own. What do you mean by that? I mean that there are some jealous collectors who are not souls of honor, Burlington said, letting his eyes rest upon Belcher for a fraction of a second. I gained the impression that the thief was stealing the vase for a man like that, one who could afford to pay him well for his work. He asked for the vase immediately and would take nothing else. I offered him money and jewels and he refused. That looked rather suspicious. And what did you think? What did you intend doing? Marta wanted to know. I thought he was going to return a replica and that my vase would be retained by the man who had hired him. I was going to call in some private detectives and make an effort to catch the man and learn the name of his employer. In fact, I believe that Mr. Belcher was the employer." "What's that?" Belcher cried. "I have nothing more to say," Burlington declared. "You are in my house, sir." "Well, there's your old vase," Belcher snarled. "What do you think of it?" Burlington asked, smiling. "Great vase, of course. Like to own it myself. But I'm not dealing in stolen goods," Belcher said virtuously. "Do you think that it is worth $20,000? "I'd pay that for it," Belcher said. "I'll sell it to you for $1,000, was Burlington's astounding statement. "Are you insane?" "No, merely gratified to know that you do not recognize an object of art when you see one, sir. This vase is a fake, pure and simple." "Fake? And if I sold it for $1,000, I'd be something like $500 ahead. Trying to make a fool of me, are you?" Belcher asked. "It's no fake, and you know it." Gordon Burlington smiled again, picked up the vase and dashed it to the floor. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. "That is how much I think of it," he said. "I did quite a bit of acting when the thief was here, for I wanted him to report to whoever had sent him that the vase was genuine. I'm not saying now that anybody sent him. Perhaps he was merely a thief who thought he could sell such a thing readily, and it appears that he did." Burlington looked at Razelus suspiciously, and Razelus began growing nervous. "Well, let's get out of here," Belcher said. "The atmosphere is none too agreeable. Perhaps that is because it is an atmosphere of art," was Gordon Burlington's comment. Chapter 8. A Narrow Escape. Back at police headquarters, Detective Sam Martyr asked for the assistance of another detective named Jones, who had often worked with him, and it was granted. He took Jones aside and told him the entire thing, and they began formulating plans for the capture of Joe Carden when he had the marked bills in his possession. He said noon, "So we'll be on the job as early as 10 o'clock in the morning," Martyr said. "We don't want to slip up on this, Jones, so we'll take nobody else into our confidence. We'll not even speak to the general delivery clerk beforehand. Either Carden or Nifty Burke will call for that mail, and we know both of them by sight. Here is where we get the Crook comedian." Later in the day, Martyr telephoned both Belcher and Razelus to make sure that the money had been put in the mail. Martyr was well satisfied with the way things were going. He had a vision of Joe Carden being sentenced to the big prison up the river, of brother officers saying they were sorry they laughed when Carden had made a fool of him before. But he might not have been so satisfied had he known everything that was in Carden's mind. The Crook comedian was not a man to leave things to chance. He was up at an early hour the following morning and had a long talk with Nifty Burke, who immediately went into the little dressing room and put on clothing that caused him to look anything but nifty. When he appeared before Joe Carden again, he had the appearance of a down-and-outer. Burke received further instructions, and then he left the place and hurried uptown. He approached the General Post Office cautiously, yet not in a manner to arouse suspicion. He loitered across the street, walked around the block, and came up from an opposite direction. And shortly after 10 o'clock he saw Detective Martyr and Jones not far away. Nifty Burke knew them both, and he was careful that they did not recognize him. He watched them for a time. Martyr and Jones were on guard, yet Burke was able to tell, within a short time, that they were not at the post office accidentally. He hurried to a telephone and called Joe Carden and gave him the news. "I half expected it, Nifty," the Crook comedian said. "Belcher called him into the case, I suppose. So you go ahead with those plans I told you, and watch for me exactly at noon. Careful now, Burke." "I get you, boss," Burke said. He felt no fear for Joe Carden, for the comedian had demonstrated on several occasions that he could care for himself. And Burke liked this game with Martyr and others of the police, liked close calls and narrow escapes. He got another taxicab and journeyed downtown to a district where men could be hired for small amounts to do anything, including murder. He searched for some time until he found the men he desired, and then he talked to them carefully and finally gave them their instructions. One was an elderly man and the other a common-looking thug. They grinned when told what was expected of them, and their eyes bulged at mention of the money they were to receive. They were given to understand, too, that they would have to carry out the program, else incur the enmity of one powerful in the underworld. Nifty Burke mentioned no names, but his manner carried conviction. As for Joe Carden, he did an amazing thing after receiving Nifty Burke's message of warning. He went into the dressing room his usual self, and emerged again an old man, stooped of shoulder, with shaggy hair, dressed in a rusty suit that made that of Razelus look like the latest in gentlemanly adornment. He slipped from the house through the alley, hobbled down the street, and got on a surface car. It took him considerable time to reach the post office, and when he did approach it, he did so with extreme caution. Nifty Burke passed him on the corner. Marta inside the door, trying to hide by the big desk, and Jones on the front steps. Nifty whispered from one corner of his mouth. "Exactly at noon, Nifty." "I get you, boss." They passed. Nifty continued around the block, and Joe Carden went up the street. It lacked half an hour of noon. Carden turned his back on the post office building and went slowly along the avenue through the crowds, like an old man with little interest left in life. 5 minutes to noon he was back at the post office corner and saw Nifty Burke standing at the bottom of the steps. He saw Detective Jones loitering at the top of the flight, but he did not see Marta. Nifty signed to him that he was ready. Joe Carden went up the steps of the side entrance and stepped just inside to fumble in an inside pocket, as though searching for a letter. He looked over his spectacles and saw Marta. The detective was not far from the general delivery window, standing so that he could dodge behind a pillar. "Wants to nab me all by himself, does he?" Carden mused, chuckling a bit. Marta is growing too ambitious. And we all know what happened to Caesar when he got ambitious. Carden looked up at the big clock on the wall. It was within a minute of 12. He stepped to a window and glanced down at the street as Nifty Burke looked up. Joe Carden passed one hand across his eyes. It was the signal for which Nifty Burke had been waiting. He immediately faced in the other direction and made a similar signal. 2 men started up the front steps from the street. The 2 Nifty had engaged. Each man had $50 in bills in his pocket. Nifty had presented the money. Up the steps they went, approaching each other, going directly toward Detective Jones. Inside the post office, Joe Carden shuffled down the wide corridor toward the general delivery window. The men on the steps did not act as though they knew each other. They met just before the swinging doors, and within 6 feet of Detective Jones, who had given them a single glance and then had turned away. And suddenly a brawl started. The elderly man, who carried a stick, struck at the one who looked like a thug. Blows fell thick and fast. Detective Jones sprang forward, and the thug thrust him away and caused him to go whirling down the steps. Marta, looking through the window, saw it. Marta acted on impulse. It flashed through his mind that Jones was at the mercy of Nifty Burke, or perhaps Joe Carden himself. Marta sprang through the door to grapple with the fighting men, just as Jones charged up the steps again. At that instant, Joe Carden stepped to the general delivery window. "Any mail for George X.Z. Brown?" he asked. Carden was a bit nervous about it, and the delivery clerk seemed very slow. But presently he tossed out the 2 letters, and Joe Carden thrust them into his pocket and hobbled on through the corridor. Marta, at that instant, seeing that he knew neither of the men who had been fighting, sensed a trap. He whirled around and dashed into the building, hurried to the window and exhibited his shield. "If anybody for mail for George X.Z. Brown," he began. "He just got it." "An old man," the clerk said. Marta whirled around again. Joe Carden was almost at the end of the corridor. At that instant, he turned and saw that Marta was after him. He didn't think Marta had recognized him, but he guessed the detective had just spoken with the clerk, and he didn't want Marta to be sure that the old man and the crook comedian were the same. Joe Carden threw aside his old-age manner and charged up the steps toward the second floor, Marta shouting and chasing after him. In the corridor above, Carden dashed like the wind to the other end and descended the steps there just as Marta reached the second floor. Joe Carden hurried to the street. He darted around the corner where Nifty Burke had a taxi waiting, jumped in, and the chauffeur who had his instructions drove rapidly away. Nifty Burke walked casually down the street to the next corner to hail a cab of his own. Detective Sam Martyr met Jones as they emerged from the post office, but Jones hadn't seen anyone matching the description of the old man. "He's tricked us," Martyr exclaimed. "He can't be far. Old man, rusty coat, stooped shoulders. I bet he's the comedian, or Burke. Take that side street and I'll take this one, and watch the exits." They searched for 15 minutes with no result. Belcher, who had been waiting with Razelus nearby, arrived. "He got away, huh?" Belcher bellowed. "With our money too? You're some hot sketch of a detective." "Oh, we'll get him, don't worry," Martyr said. "Where's your car?" Signaled the chauffeur. "I know where he lives. We'll go down there now and nab him." Belcher signaled, and his large car pulled up to the curb. They all got in, Belcher, Razelus, Martyr, and Jones, and Martyr instructed the chauffeur to ignore traffic rules and head to the address. But Joe Carden had a head start, as had Burke. Carden left his cab a block from his residence, paid the chauffeur handsomely, hurried through the alley, and let himself into his rooms. His wig, trousers, and old coat went down the dumbwaiter. Carden changed into his usual attire quickly and hid the 2 letters in a safe spot. Burke rushed in, changed clothes, and placed the old ones in the dumbwaiter. "Good job," Carden said. "I bet they'll be here soon. I have a hunch, Nifty, that Martyr knows where we live. And that reminds me, I still have something to do." He went into the bathroom and closed the door. Burke could hear the water running. When Joe Carden emerged, he was grinning. "Now we're ready for them," he said. "Everything natural, Burke, please." "I got it, boss." Chapter 9. A Greater Surprise. The doorbell rang. Carden nodded, and Burke released the latch, going to the top of the stairs. Sam Martyr led the way, his hand in his coat pocket gripping his pistol, with Jones close behind, followed by Belcher and Razelus. "Well, Burke, the game's up," Martyr said. "I want Joe Carden." "Mr. Carden is in, sir," Burke replied, in the voice of a perfect servant. "In, is he? Trying to bluff it out, is he? We'll see about that." Martyr strode into the living room, followed by the others. The Crook comedian sat near a window in a dressing gown and slippers, reading a book. He looked up calmly, then stood. "Hello, Martyr. And you, Jones. But I don't believe I know these other 2 gentlemen." "Oh, I'll introduce you, if it will help your comedy routine. This is Mr. Roger Belcher, and this other is Razelus, who runs an antique shop." "Antique shop," Razelus corrected nervously. Martyr turned to Belcher. "Is this the man?" "Yes," Belcher affirmed. "And what about you, Razelus?" "It's him, sir." "And so he doesn't recognize us, eh?" Belcher sneered, stepping forward. "Excuse me, but isn't your attitude rather peculiar, Mr. Welcher, was it?" Joe Carden asked. "These are my apartments, you know." "Martyr, what's all this about?" "You might as well come clean, Carden. We've caught you red-handed." "That sounds intriguing. Suppose you explain." "You're wanted for theft, blackmail, and impersonating an officer," Martyr declared. "Are you forgetting highway robbery and murder? Is this a joke?" "Explain yourself, Martyr." Belcher pushed Martyr aside. "Enough of this nonsense talk," the financier exclaimed. "You might be able to fool a cop, but not me. You went to Gordon Burlington's residence a few nights ago and stole a Chinese vase. You thought it was real, but it was a fake. You sold that vase to Razelus for $2,000, and I bought it from him. Then you came to my house and tried to blackmail me. I gave you $1,000 to make you think I'd pay more later, hoping you'd demand more and get caught. Then you sent letters to Razelus and me demanding more money, and a short time ago you picked up those letters at the post office. We've got you, Carden." "Yes, we've got you this time, my clever comedian Crook," Martyr added. "I've never heard anything more absurd in my life." Joe Carden said. I'm quite sure I can provide an alibi. I saw you myself at 4 o'clock in the morning the night that vase was stolen, Marta insisted. But that doesn't prove I stole a vase. I often take early morning walks. Enough of this nonsense. Arrest him, Marta. I hope Marta won't make any mistakes, Joe Carden said calmly. It might cost the city. Let's investigate this a bit first. Razelus, did you say you bought the vase from me? Yes, Razelus replied. And I say you didn't. Did anyone else see me sell it to him? I knew you'd try to lie your way out, Marta interrupted. And Mr. Belcher claims I visited his house? You did, and walked away with $1,000 of my money. One of my staff can identify you. One of your servants might say that some man resembling me was in your house, said Carden. And you might say the same. But as for it being, didn't I tell you he'd say that? Marta asked Belcher. We're ready for you, Joe Carden. You might convince a jury it wasn't you, just someone who looks a lot like you. But we have further identification. I'd be interested in hearing it, Carden said. Razelus, Marta demanded, did the man who dealt with you regarding that vase have a scar on his left wrist? No, sir. What kind of scar? A distinct purple one running across the inside of the wrist, about 6 inches long. Mr. Belcher, did the man who visited you and received that $1,000 have such a scar on his left wrist? He did, Belcher exclaimed. And so we have you, Carden, Marta continued. There may be another man who looks like you, but hardly one with the same scar. This time, Carden, I'm not afraid to take you in. We've got you. Here, he grabbed Joe Carden by the arm. Nifty Burke felt a sinking sensation. This seemed like the end. Detective Marta pushed back Joe Carden's sleeve, and then he gasped, turning purple in the face again. On Joe Carden's left wrist, there was not the faintest hint of a scar. What? Marta gasped. All of this is beyond me, Carden said, faintly smiling. Could it be that some crook who looks like me is causing trouble? You've sworn to the scar, and I hold you to it. Arrest me if you like, and I'll sue you in every court in the land, Belcher. It'll cost you a lot of money and some publicity you won't like. And I'll sue you, Razelus. And you too, Marta, and the city as well. Now I'm sick of this. Either arrest me and face the consequences, or get out. They stared at him in disbelief. One or the other, and quickly, Joe Carden exclaimed. I've had enough of this nonsense. Detective Sam Marta suspected he had been deceived somehow, but he didn't dare make the arrest. They had put too much weight on that scar, and now it had backfired. We'd lose, Mr. Belcher, Marta admitted. I won't make the arrest on my own authority. But he's the man, Belcher insisted. And you testified about the scar, and he doesn't have one on his wrist, Marta said. We'd better leave. Search the place first. Look for those letters and that money. Look for the old clothes he supposedly wore. Glad to have you, if you have a search warrant, Joe Carden said, grinning again. Bah! Marta exclaimed. We can't do it, Mr. Belcher. This man is a crook, I know it. But he has legitimate money in the bank and can fight back. We can't take the law into our own hands here. You said he had a scar. I think you should leave now, Carden said. And if you find the guy who looks like me and is stealing vases and such, give me a call and I'll come and take a look at him myself. Carden was still smiling as Burke escorted the 4 men to the door. Burke hurried back into the room. Boss, he whispered, I thought they had you. That scar was a fake, like the vase, Burke. I've been painting it on my wrist daily for some time, waiting for an opportunity like this. Well, Burke, we win again. 9,000 in total. I can pass those marked bills without getting caught. Glad Marta didn't have the nerve to search the place and find those clothes in the dumbwaiter. I didn't think he would. But he'll be after us harder now, Burke. He knows he's been tricked. Did you take care of those 2 guys who staged the fight? Sure did. Gave them 50 each and got a lawyer to handle their cases. Good work. Seems like everything turned out fine. There's just one thing bothering me, Burke. That woman who calls herself the Nameless One. I wonder how much she knows about this and other things. Sometimes, Burke, I'm a little scared of her. No need to be, boss. Why not? She won't hurt you. Listen, boss. And then Nifty Burke smiled, tilted his head to one side and said, "And how's Mr. Carden this morning?" "You!" Carden exclaimed. "I'm something of a crook comedian myself," Burke said. "I started it as a joke and kept it going to keep you on your toes. Can't a man have his fun?" Joe Carden looked at him seriously for a moment, and Burke feared he had gone too far. Then the crook comedian grinned, and Nifty Burke knew it was all right. End of Carden, Crook Comedian by Johnston McCulley.